Maybe. Awesome.
All right, we are live. Happy
Mm,
Monday.
you're right? Absolutely. Let's get Instagram rolling. I see it popping up over there, so get them rolling.
There we go. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to our multiple Facebook pages. Welcome to Twitch. Welcome to, of course, YouTube. Welcome to our Instagram pages. Welcome to Rumble. Welcome to X. Welcome to Apple Podcast and Spotify and iHeartRadio, and I'm forgetting another one. There's another one in there.
Amazon
A couple
Music.
more. There we go. Amazon Music. And welcome, welcome. So today is Monday, November 17th. The month is flying by.
Right? It seems like we were just getting ready to start this year, and then we were talking about summer, and now summer's gone, and you and I were discussing earlier today our weather, and I'm like, yeah, we're already cold.
I know. I'm sitting here in shorts and a tank top because we were 88 today. So anyway, yeah,
Wow.
I know. That's what happens when you live in the South.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think our high today was maybe in the 60s, and tomorrow I think it's supposed to be in the 40s. So,
Ooh. Ooh.
and that's the high for tomorrow is in the 40s. So
That's
that's right.
funny,
Cold exposure.
right? Well, again, we want to thank everyone for tuning in. Welcome back to the Beyond our Nutrition podcast. I am Sherri, and you can find me on social media by Step by Healing Step. And this is Becky, and you can find her on social media under I am Becky Niles. So hopefully you are following us on social media because we do post a lot of things, and if you kind of watch us, you can kind of tell a lot of times the topics we're going to talk about on Monday nights. Have you noticed we do that?
Hmm. It's kind of like our little way of teaser into the topic, right? Because it goes so far beyond just food, right? So
Right,
we kind of
right.
tease into it a little bit. Or
Yeah.
join us in the BNC community, because this topic has also come up in there prior to tonight. So
It actually was the topic of my meeting on Friday. And I was sitting in my meeting going, I think this is going to be our topic for Monday night because there's just so much to unpack with this topic, right? So, what are we talking about? Well, we titled this podcast tonight, Don't Let Perceptions Be Based on Deceptions. Right? And it's kind of a truth teller in a lot of ways. Um, if you hold a mirror up to the stories that you've absorbed, inherited, or internalized, those are probably the ones that are keeping you stuck and spinning, right? And we see that not only we see it right with ourselves, but we also see it with our clients.
hmm yeah, it's definitely this world, and it's like I said, it's not just health, but mindset and social media, right? We just got through telling people follow us on social media, but social media also ends up and plays into this too. And it's when we're living in a world of filters and quick fixes and highlight reels, if you will, right? That's where I can't tell you the numerous times that I've talked to clients and said, you're on a journey of your own, right? You have to end up and take the pictures, take the measurements, do the journal. It doesn't have to be logging every morsel of food, right? But
Mm,
it can end up, and you have to be able to identify, right, the truth.
right.
And it's very easy to make a mistake in that, or create this gray area, right, of a narrative that you're on. And the only quote normal, right, is what is your normal. It's
Yeah.
not. And this last summer we did a challenge that was better than yourself, right? It wasn't a I'm going to be, the best in the group, or I'm going to lift the most in the community, or anything along those lines. It was judging your progress on your own, because how we judge our own progress, again, that deception creeps in when the perception isn't grounded in that reality. And so it wasn't, looking at how are we going to, these are the areas, right? But if I end up and I tell someone, I want you, we'll just say drinking 100 ounces of water, or I want you, looking like this, right? It's on your own. It's you're chasing, right, this relationship with yourself,
Right.
not
Right.
necessarily an illusion or a social media, influencer figure.
Yeah, there's a psychological perception when you start to believe the lie. What you, especially on social media, we see others succeed,
Mhm.
right? And then we start to question our own healing journey and wondering, well, why am I not measuring up to that person that I'm watching? So it clouds our um, judgment, for lack of
Mhm.
a better word. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely one of those cases where there I can't say everyone, many, I'll put it that way, many are creating this illusion of perfect, right? This their journey is perfect and it's all gone easy, anywhere from, their body image to their daily routines, right? They don't end up and tell you that, last week was a shit show. Sorry, sorry. Hopefully no children are listening. A crapshoot, right? For PG language here. No one ends up and tells you that, right? A lot of people aren't going to end up and come on and say, hey, I'm struggling. This sucks. Whatever, right? And
Yeah.
I am, at times guilty of that as well, right? I don't end up and but to me it's not because I'm not sharing it, right? We share it in the community. I
Yeah.
share it with others. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've called you and been like, this, this went
Hmm.
wrong, right? But I don't necessarily put it out there on social media. One,
Hmm.
because it's a public space that a lot of it I don't feel needs to end up personal business or personal, if it's
Hmm.
in relationship to my journey, if it's in relationship to what I am doing, right? There is areas, but if it comes to my family and, that side of it, I'm going to end up and protect my family and protect my
Sure.
kids from the, influence kickback, right? And by that I mean the fact that, I have several thousand followers. A lot of them I don't know.
Hmm.
So it's not necessarily that I'm trying to, you know, create this reality that it's all easy,
Hmm.
but it's a case of I'm protecting that side of it.
Right. You have to. I mean, you and I know a mutual person on social media, and the hate that she experiences it boggles my mind, and I know it does yours as well. Like we've sat back. I mean, we've actually talked to her in person. We've met her a couple times in person, and
Mhm,
just it's just very shocking how when she shares something, how people just take and twist it, or they're ugly about it. They've attacked her kids, her grandkids. It's like, so there is a side of being cautious,
yeah.
but I think what we're talking about is the perception based on the deceptions of, you know, um, you, for example, if you feel bad because you couldn't stick to a certain calorie plan, let's say it was a 1200 calorie plan, 1200. Um, and you couldn't stick with it, and so you start to believe that you're bad at discipline, when in reality your body was in survival mode, right?
Mhm.
So but we don't see that. I mean, we've seen things like this, I know, the sugar diet, which makes my head explode, but
Right. Well, and that's where it's teaching moments, right?
yes.
Because this deception, it thrives from a disconnect, right? When we end up,
Yeah.
we disconnect from the truth, whether that is our own body signals, our own intuition, our own data, right? And I'm guilty of this deception cycle, right? I was in that for a couple years when I knew, right, that my body was giving me feedback, right? Whether it was my
Mhm.
thyroid or whether it was my triglycerides or whether it was the weight coming back or my A1C, that wasn't, decreasing, right? It was
Mhm.
increasing because obviously my blood sugar. So what am I not doing right, right? I must be doing something wrong in this, and I must be just needing to go harder or experiment with a different way, right?
Mhm.
And by that I am talking about full elimination. For anyone that is watching this, you've seen on my Instagram where I have become more vocal. I have an interview coming up in December to discuss this as well. But it's a case where I was that influencer, right? There were a couple years that I was heavily promoting a carnivore or elimination based approach, and I wasn't listening to my body when
Mhm.
my thyroid was down regulating. Um, and so that's where we're talking about this whole deception side of things is,
Mhm.
instead of me using it as a teaching moment, right? Instead of me taking a step back and being like, this isn't working, I maybe need to branch out. It took me, right? I was 2.5 years to end up to
Mhm.
break that cycle where I finally was like, I can't do this. No
Yeah.
matter whether it was, because it would be you're not consuming enough fat, you're not consuming enough protein, you're consuming too much protein, you're consuming too much, you're not enough, too much. It was just this back and forth, and everything was trying to, until finally I said,
Yeah.
I need to open that door and create a reintroduction aspect. And ever since I started that, it I leaned into it, but I didn't lean into it fully, right? I was still deceiving myself in thinking I'm adding this, I'm doing this, right?
Mhm.
And that's where the stress side of it comes in, right? Because I felt like I was adding enough. I felt better, but I didn't fully trust myself, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily myself. I didn't trust the process enough to really reconnect with the truth that of what I was seeing.
Yeah.
I was seeing things get better. I was seeing that progress and seeing that momentum, but it's like the having the devil and the angel, right? The devil's over, or I don't want to call it the devil because it does work for some people. I don't want to end up and say that it's not a beneficial tool to use keto or use carnivore.
Right.
They are great metabolic tools used in short-term methods.
Mhm.
Just going to end up and get that out of there. So the little person on one shoulder and the little person on the other shoulder, right? One was saying very strongly that I ended up and this was supposed to work. So I
Yeah.
was still flipping back and forth, right? I was never really leaning into the fact of how beneficial it could be to lean into, more of the whole food, the seasonal side of things, and trusting that more up until this year. And
Yeah.
I did. And, look at where I'm at now. So,
Well, and you and I've had the off camera, off private conversation, which I'm going to throw out there. It won't be private anymore. But you and I both have agreed that we're scared of carbs, right? There's been this, oh my gosh, carbs are bad, right? Because of the
Can I tell
journey that we've
you?
both been on, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was, my body was telling me that eating a militant carnivore diet, my body was screaming and I wasn't listening. And I dug in deeper and went more militant than ever before. I mean, if you could even possibly, I don't even know how I was able to even do that even more. And you and I would watch my A1C, my blood sugar just go completely out of control.
Mhm.
And yes, when I reintroduced a good carb, oof, did my blood sugar jump that night? But it came right back down too. And but it still has been a learning lesson too, because there's still something in the back of my brain that says, carbs are bad. And we're talking about good carbs. We're not talking about
Mhm.
the processed carbs, right? We're talking about the good carbs, that the whole foods. And there's still something in the back of my head that says, well, oh, you're a type 2 diabetic. That's bad. You can't have that. And so I know I've battled it as well as you.
Yeah, and that's where, like I said, even when I started to reintroduce, right, it took me several years before I'm like, oh, I can end up and, have more carbs, right? It's all about the energy of the body.
Mhm.
And so it's reclaiming that perspective of what you're truly doing, right? Reconnecting with your truth. Again, we're talking about our own stories. We're talking
Mhm.
about your story, the listener story, right? How do you feel, right? How are you sleeping? How's your digestion? How's your thinking? All of that, right? Checking these inputs.
Mhm.
And if
Mhm.
something is off, right? Who and what and why, are you are you shaping it that way, right? If
Mhm.
it's off and you're not sleeping well and you're, really not seeing progress,
Right.
why are you sticking to something that potentially maybe isn't working? And
Well,
so that's where, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead.
And that's where you have to practice the fact of, really pausing, right? Reflecting. And again, we created that journal to really create and anchor people into this side of things, right? The consistency, the habits, how your body is communicating, right? Creating that checklist, if you will. And I can't tell you how many times I've even, we've thrown it at each other, right?
I know,
Check
yeah.
in. What are you doing? What of the basics,
Yep.
right? Are you doing or are you not doing? And what has got into this gray area? Because once we end up when we start to pause and reflect, right, instead of compare,
Right.
right, we start dropping that doubting of the process.
Right. Well, I and something, and I had said this in my meeting on Friday inside our BNC community, but I'm going to say it here. I asked the question, has anyone else noticed that detoxing is flaring up again with influencers? And you're starting to see this influx of, oh my goodness, you have to detox, right?
Yep.
And you said, yeah, you had noticed that. Somebody else said that they hadn't. But um, that's a perfect example of, and I'm not saying detoxing is bad. But you and I both have seen detoxing to where somebody is so ill.
I think there's a lot of areas, right? It's not just the
Yeah,
detox. It's
yeah,
people are chasing, and body composition can end up and be in there, but health doesn't always look linear and it doesn't always look pretty, right? There's going to end up
right.
and be areas that aren't necessarily pretty, right? There's
Yep,
going to end up and be plateaus.
yep,
I try to be like I said, as if it is involved in my wellness side, right? If it's involved in that, not necessarily my, personal family business, but my wellness side, And then I try to end up and share. And last week, I had to stop and think. Last week, I shared that the scale didn't move, but I was
Mhm.
honest about it, right? I was honest with the fact that I had 2 children, right, that had
Yeah.
birthdays last week. I was honest with the fact that we had family in town, well, the friends, but
Right.
we classify them as family. Um, and they were in town, right? So the kids' birthdays, my daughter and I went out with my mom, and we ate takeout essentially. Um, we had friends visiting. There were a couple late, meals. So again, right?
Yeah.
I made the conscious choice to enjoy and not necessarily start over on Monday. It's a lifestyle. I am looking at this in a whole different mindset. And that's where, really
Yeah.
leaning into this fact of what is it as far as context of healing for you. It's not that I'm creating a stagnation, or that I'm creating this stillness, or that I'm in denial of the process. And no, I didn't go into any heavy detox or crazy extremes after that, right? I acknowledged it for what it was, and I moved on.
Yeah.
That is what creating a metabolically flexible, healthy journey, right, looks like. There's gonna be times where you have to make peace with the
Mhm.
journey, not be mad, not feel I screwed up, I'm a failure, why is this not working? Make peace with the journey, have
Right.
patience, but also have that balance and not chase perfection.
Well, it's the stories we tell ourselves, right?
Mhm.
And I know fairly recently I've said to you, um, my body doesn't like it, and it only works for a short amount of time and it stops. And that's the narrative that I had told myself for decades, right? And of course, thank goodness you called me on the carpet on it. But it was that old internalized deception that, because I'm struggling right now. I am gaining weight. I'm going back to basics, right? I have a certain set of macros that I'm following. We're working on things. But I'll be honest. I'm going to tell everyone my leptin is high right now, and we're trying, between Becky and I, we're trying to figure out here, where is that rooted and what is causing this, right?
Mhm.
Um, and it's but it's you got to be careful with that narrative, right? That self doubt that wears a mask of realism, right? It's oh, my body doesn't like. Whoa. See, my body is different than what it was even 2 years ago. My body is different than even what it was a year ago. So that narrative doesn't work anymore. Or the narrative of if I just lose 20 pounds, I'll feel X, or I'll
Mhm.
reward myself at that point. Um, and one of the things that you and I talk heavily, we have an affirmations journal, even, that you have to change that narrative around, because your body believes what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, and that's where it comes from, past failures, the
Hmm.
trauma. I mean, comparison. I mean, a lot of us have been, conditioned over time, right, to end up and have this running in the background. And so it is making that conscious choice. And yes, we've both been there, right? You can't it's really hard to end up because your mind automatically wants to end up and spark that dialogue, right? So changing that story of what you are telling yourself,
Hmm.
it's just about rewriting it. I mean, I know I throw it at you a lot of rewrite that, right? You're not that person.
Because
I'm like, you've got to end up and rewrite that. You've got to tell
yeah,
yourself something different.
right.
And, who is it that, is teaching yourself, and what lens do you want that person to end up and be seen? right?
Mhm.
I've told several people, go back and write that younger version of yourself. If you can think back to a point in your journey, in your process, where it started to go wrong, or you start the perception, right, of how you are shaping your story and the story that we're telling ourselves. If you can go back, right, and write that letter to that younger version and retell your story, right? I put a video out, it's been a while ago, but I put a video out of hugging the younger version of myself,
Mhm.
or the starting version of myself, right? Because it hasn't been an easy process, it hasn't been an easy journey. And yeah, there's haters, there's several different
Mhm.
ways, but I haven't given up. We haven't given up,
Mhm.
right? So even though, yes, you end up and have, the high leptin, there's people that have high leptin, there's people that have low leptin, there's people that have high cortisol, right? It's just how we are sometimes how we think something is quote wrong, right? Because maybe we're tired, or maybe we're anxious, or maybe you didn't sleep well, right? We can start to get that I'm failing. You know,
Mhm.
everything is wrong, right? I had a poor night's sleep, and now it's just going to end up and go wrong, and I'm not going to be able, and it just starts this whole, cascade, right? Or maybe you ended up and went somewhere and there was a bunch of blue lights, right? So it threw off your circadian signal, and you ended up awake later than you normally. There's so many things, but it again, your body is very smart. It wants to end up and heal itself. And so changing that narrative and getting right back on track,
Yes.
right? It's not that your body or your biology is necessarily trashed or dysregulated, right? But it's more, again, going back into the nervous system and going back into the perception of how we will be and clearing that.
Right. Yeah, I haven't even shared this with you, but if you guys follow me on social media, I promise this week I will share. So I found a picture of myself from 10 years ago to now. And well, I'm a lot grayer, right? But my face shape is completely different than what it was 10 years ago. And I forget that. I forget that I'm not that person anymore. And I don't know if you guys have listened to the past podcasts that we had, but I was mowing. I was on the tractor. I was
That's why I
mowing.
started laughing
You knew
because
where I was going, yeah. So I'm on the tractor. I'm mowing, and I don't even have the picture anymore. Becky does.
I do.
I know she does,
I do.
but so we have a trail camera that we feed the deer. We watch the deer. We like wildlife, and so I go by the camera on the tractor and not thinking anything until I looked at the camera later that day, and it was a very nice, lovely side view of me in all my glory with the seatbelt on and on the tractor, and I got this big old floppy hat, and I'm looking a mess, and I was like, oh my gosh, look at the like that's a side view I didn't want to ever see. And what did you say? I sent it to you. I did. I screenshot it and I'm like, oh,
You did. And I'm attempting at finding that conversation, but it was more a case of the fact that would that older version, right? We were
yeah,
talking about the fact of would that older version of yourself have been able to even, be on that tractor? Would the
right.
older, version have been able to put the dang seatbelt on,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um, and so, of course, then you started to get sassy with me. And yes, I still have all kinds of pictures. I know. I know.
What? Who, me? I
Can you
got sassy.
believe it?
I got fancy. Yeah.
Um, and so then I started throwing old pictures at you, and I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah, she did.
would this person have been able to be on the tractor? Would this
Yeah.
person have been able to do what you're doing today?
Mhm.
So yeah, I can't necessarily find the pictures because that's just one how many times we text back and forth. But it
Right.
it's learning this again, kind of topic for tonight, right? The discernment and aspect, right? Means you are learning to separate, right? The
Mm.
truth from the noise, progress, the comparison, right? Yes, we end up when we take these pictures, but it's
Mhm.
comparison for inspiration, right?
Right.
Again, you're not that person,
No.
right? Um, the difference in the symptoms, right? That you
No.
from your story, right? The previous acting version, right? If no one has heard, the podcast that we did when we were first introducing ourselves, go back and listen to them. But when you were acting and you weren't able to bend over and hardly
No.
sit on the floor, right?
No.
And now you're out mowing for 6 hours on a Saturday,
Yeah.
right? That old version would not have been able to do that. And so, teaching yourself, right, that this is real, right? It's you maybe have that glimpse,
Mhm.
right? Or that lapse, I should say, but is it the truth, right? Or is it the fatigue maybe talking,
Sure.
that earlier version, right? Is this truly what you're experiencing? And that's why we put the pictures out there. That's why we do
Mhm.
the measurements. Sure, last week when I didn't have positive scale result, even though, I'm working very hard um to change the body composition, right? It's more than just the scale, it's the whole body composition. And yeah, anyway, um I could have felt defeated, right? I could have been
Yeah.
like, this sucks, I'm done, this isn't working,
Mhm.
I've got to do something different. And instead I did the measurements and it's like, okay, body
Yeah.
composition's changing, right? It's not that must a pound's a pound. That is the I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a second. That is something that ends up and drives me nuts is when someone says a pound of fat and a pound of muscle end up and weighed differently. A pound is a pound, and I don't care if it's a pound of bricks or a pound of feathers. A pound is a pound. It's the space that it ends up and takes up. And this is something that you and I both can end up and see is clothes are fitting different,
Yeah.
measurements, they're changing, right? So even though you may end up and be up on the scale, you're still not wearing those same clothes, right? There's areas of your body that you are seeing a change in. I see a change, right? I see it in the way my clothes fit. I see it in the clothes that I end up and I wear. Okay, so I maybe end up and wear my oversized, not necessarily my 2X sweater, but I wear my large sweater instead. But, you know, again, go back and listen to some of the other stories because last winter I wore my big old comfy sweater and I love that sweater and I still have that sweater, but that's neither here or there. But it's a case of again maturing in the healing and really reflecting on this that we end up when we see the light,
Right.
right? We see the power of what we are doing.
Well, perception isn't just what we see, it's the lens that we've inherited, right?
Yeah.
That's the lens that I think that I'm still 300 pounds, right? The stories that I've absorbed, the whispers that, I've heard, and, look how big she is, that kind of stuff. It's the voice that told us that we weren't worthy. It's the hustle. It was, we had to suffer, right? This was
Yeah.
painful. This is suffering. And those beliefs were never ours to claim. They were borrowed, they were imposed upon, they were repeated to us. Um, and they became, for lack of a better word, invisible cages. It's in that cage, right? It's familiar, it's quiet, but it's also limiting. And we were not meant to live in that cage at all. So we were meant to reclaim and rise, and because perception isn't permanent. Um, that's that's the gist of tonight. Perception is most likely based on a deception.
Yeah. Well, it's again, I say it all the time, right? Conscious choice. Because a lot of those stories you are not consciously choosing,
Right.
right? So much of the perception is shaped, like you said, by these private stories, not only that we're telling ourselves, but the whispers, all of that in the background. And so when we hear that, we start to believe that. And so, you're not consciously choosing.
Yeah.
Where if you take that power and you make the conscious choice, you rewire that into your own dialogue, right? You end up and manifest your reality of what your power is going to end up and be. And so, yeah, you have to separate some of that. You have to end up and, be honest with the world around you, right? And sometimes that means closing your circle, right? Really finding what fills you instead of empties you,
Yeah.
right? And there's a lot out there in the wellness world, and I'll group everyone under an umbrella that is full of misleading ideas.
Yeah.
And and I'm not saying that we end up and have all the answers, right?
Right.
But when there's people out there that are telling you, 1200 calories are enough, or lose 10 pounds in 10 days, or carbs are going to kill you because they're the enemy, or just the favorite one, the one that's more well known, right? Just eat less and move more,
Yeah.
right? If you're not seeing progress, end up and go harder, right? That's why these hard challenges, I'm not going to end up and put the full name in there, but these hard challenges,
Mhm.
right? Or you end up and you see, gym bodies that are touting different, supplements, right? Fat burner in a bottle, or, cortisol drinks. And it's not what real healing looks like. And
Yeah.
that's where the real healing and the real alignment has to be yours. It's your story. Only people can end up and give you ideas of, how to bring that back to yourself. But the perception improves when your inner world is regulated, right? When
Yep.
your audience, right? And that's why we try to end up and help you. That's why we end up when we bring these conversations to the podcast. And whether you're listening on audio only, or you're still here listening to us on YouTube and all the other lovely platforms. I know we've got people over on Twitter listening, and we've got people on Twitch, as well as those listening on Instagram right now. And so, we appreciate you. We're glad that you have joined us, but it's a case of, in order to understand that clarity, you have to create the calm in the storm, right?
Yes.
Your truth is going to come from consistency. I can't tell you how many times I have talked about consistency,
Oh yeah.
right? It's it is so important to end up and have that consistency with what you're doing. And healing comes when we align, not force. You
Yeah.
shouldn't have to white knuckle your way through.
Yeah. We
So,
both cringe when we hear people go, how hard that they and I'm going to use fasting as an example. There's other things too, but fasting, and it's like, you know, if you have to white knuckle it so bad to survive a fast, your body's telling you something.
exactly.
And we don't view our bodies as brilliant. Seriously, we just don't. Um, my body constantly is telling me, I just have to be willing to listen what it's telling me. Your body, everybody's body, And um, when you start leaning into that and that pace of that powerful, it becomes sacred. And you see, if you could look at yourself through the eyes of compassion, if I could look at myself like Becky looks at me, it would probably look a whole lot different. If I same vice versa, right?
Mhm.
If
Mhm.
Becky could see how I see her through my eyes, it's probably a whole lot different. And that truth is what we're resisting.
Yeah. Absolutely. But, the biggest thing that I hope people end up at takeaway is the fact that when perception is rooted in the truth, your story of truth, instead of all this deception, clarity ends up and becomes the compass, right? You will have to look at that inner compass, and that healing becomes inevitable, right? You are unstoppable when you lean on your inner compass. When you start to end up and control the narrative of your journey, anything is possible.
Right, right. And I remember being 300 pounds. I'm going to use this. Um, and all I wanted to do was just be under 200 pounds. If I was 199, I was going to be happy, right? And never thinking that I could lose that much weight. Um, well, I'm here. I'm under the 200 mark, and it's funny how it all shifts, right? And I have forgotten that desperate silent plea to myself of just, if I could just, right? And I've done some hard work, and there has to be some grace given in all of that as well. Um, yeah, would I love to be able to drop, 2 pounds a week for the next, year? Heck yeah. My body's not doing that. And I don't think most people's bodies are doing that if they're being truthful.
Yeah. And I mean, as someone that is on the flip side of that, right?
Mhm.
Because again, I am on a mission to change that. And so I am seeing that body composition, and I'm naturally, right? I'm not doing any pills, right? I'm
Mhm.
working on the foundations, I'm working on the basics, and I am seeing that body weight shift. Um, but it's not a quick fix, right? It's not one of those where, 30 pounds in 3 months. I've been consistently working on this since May,
Mhm.
right? So there is that difference. And no, not every day is, beautiful, but definitely not where I was in May.
Right.
Well,
Well, I think the takeaway is perception is very powerful, but it's yours.
mhm,
We've talked tonight. We've given you stories. Um, those labels, the expectations, they're not yours. You get to choose again, right? Tonight, you get to choose again. Today, if you're listening to it today, you get to choose um, the noise. You get to rewrite that narrative. You get to reclaim that lens. You get to see your body through that new compassion, your worth, and your wellness. And let this be your reminder that you're not too much, you're not behind, you're not broken, you're becoming, and your truth is the compass. So breathe, trust your knowing, and walk forward in that clarity and compassion and the courage to see yourself clearly. And if you need a little help, Becky and I did write an affirmations journal that you can actually. I don't know if you can throw it up there, Becky. If they've do we? She wasn't expecting that. She was
it
looking at me
wasn't.
like, "What?" Yeah, and we even gave prompts, and we made it affordable to the point that it honestly isn't very much. I don't even remember how much we charged for it, but it wasn't very
$7.
much.
$7 for
$7.
the affirmation journal. See,
Right, because
I have quick fingers.
I love it. Number one, we wanted you. Is it worth it? Is $7 worth it? Right? Great. Is it's not, $557. It's, you know, we gave you prompts. If you can't come up with your own affirmations, we have that written for you. We have a space in there for you to write your own affirmations. And it's a great place to start. And it's hard to start. It's hard to look at yourself in the mirror and give positive affirmations to that person looking back at you. So that's why we wrote that is we wanted to do it. And Becky and I do use it
Mhm.
ourselves.
Yep, absolutely. And like you said, the biggest thing from tonight is, stay the course, stay aligned, reach out. We both also end up and do one-on-one coaching. So,
Mhm.
if you want someone to help hold you accountable and hold your hand and, take you through this, right? Because that is process part of the process is, seeing yourself with honesty. And sometimes it takes that outside person to end up and help you. So you are the only one that can choose your next step, and we're here to support you with that aligned step forward. So
Fantastic. Well, we will be back next Monday night, live 7 p.m. Central Time. Of course, we're streaming to all the platforms. You can go back and rewatch. We ask so much that you leave a comment and a review if you want. We do read them. We do appreciate it. We are not sponsored by anyone. We're just two women that, when we set out to do this, we decided we're not even going to put makeup on, and we're going to have some real truth in talking and hopefully resonate to our audience, to know that you're not in this alone. And hopefully you've picked up some great tips along the way.
absolutely, and definitely share the link with others if you felt this conversation was beneficial. If you are listening on the streaming platforms, those streaming platforms can end up and be found on the major streaming sites. So I did have someone reach out to me and ask if we were on Spotify. Yes, we are on Spotify. We're on Apple. We're on pretty much every streaming platform. So if if you find it beneficial, end up and share, even if it's just the YouTube. Share it to your stories. Let others know that healing is possible. So have a wonderful evening, and we will